my uncle. As a teacher and as a public speaker, I'm used to speaking in front of large groups of people. I'm very comfortable doing it. I'm not at all nervous. So I don't usually use notes, but please bear with me today if I rely heavily on the written word to get me through the next few minutes. In August of 1973, my parents were hired on staff at Christian Haven, Home for Boys in Wheatfield, Indiana. The three of us were moving from the city of Madison, Wisconsin to a little tiny town of less than 500 people in rural Indiana. My dad was asked to move right away, but my mom had to stay behind at the nursing home she worked at for another month. So my dad and I loaded up the car and we moved to Indiana. The last instructions that my mother gave to my dad before we moved was, don't pick a church until I get there. I want to check out churches with you. When we got to Wheatfield, we met Nancy Gushy and her family, and I'm so delighted to see Nancy here today. Nancy and her family invited my dad and me to attend church with them the first Sunday we were in town. It was a long drive to Crown Point, but the Gushys insisted that it was a wonderful church full of friendly people who loved the Lord. They were right. Before we had been in Indiana a week, and before my mom ever had a chance to visit another church, Dad declared that First Baptist Church of Crown Point was our new church home. Nancy, I've known you since I was 8 years old. I don't know if I ever told you this, but thank you for introducing my family to this wonderful church family that my dad was a part of for more than 40 years. My mom was not happy when she got to Indiana and learned that my dad had already selected a church. She grudgingly went to church with us that next Sunday, and she met the people, and she was hooked. First Baptist Church of Crown Point was a community of believers who lived out their faith in community with one another, genuinely and effectively. Many of those people are in this room today, and I thank you for being here. Although my parents lived in Wheatfield at the time and later DeMott, they considered their church in Crown Point, their church home in Crown Point, to be their real home. And so in 1978, we moved to Crown Point. Against my will, but they were insistent. My parents said that they wanted me to go to school with the same kids that I went to church with. I too became hooked. Crown Point has been my home ever since. I graduated from high school there, here. I met and married my beautiful wife here in Crown Point, and we remained members of First Baptist Church, which later became Hillside Community Church, for many years before God called us to another ministry. When my mom died in 2006, we asked Dad to move in with us in DeMott, which he did. He lived with us for 3 years before he got his own apartment just a mile away. But even though he lived in DeMott, for the last 9 years of his life, Crown Point has always been home to my dad. A couple of years after Dad moved in with us, he related to us over the dinner table one night a very interesting story that took us completely off guard. He didn't seem all that concerned by the fact that he had been stopped by a Hebron police officer for driving on the wrong side of the road. The officer originally suspected that my father was driving drunk, which is absolutely hilarious for all of you who know my father. A little known fact, my father drank alcohol one time in his life. He tried a beer on an airplane in 1955 and hated it. Dad was having difficulty seeing the line down the middle of the road. And it became apparent to us that he was no longer able to drive. Fortunately, there were many people in my dad's life who stepped in and helped him with transportation. We were blessed to have Dave and Ruth Turinga living nearby. And they were always willing to give my dad a ride to church every Sunday. And when Dave passed away suddenly, Ruth continued to minister to my dad and to my family by faithfully taking him to church every Sunday. I'm so grateful to Ruth. I don't know if she was able to make it today. I didn't see her, but I know that many people in here know and love Ruth. And I hope you will let her know how genuinely special she is to us. I spoke with her the night after my father died, and she indicated to me that she was deeply going to miss their conversations every Sunday morning on the way to church. My father volunteered at Every Child Ministries in Valpo, in Hebron, twice a week. He also did volunteer work from home. A dear volunteer, Wally, who is here today, would drive my dad to and from ECM twice a week. Wally, thank you for your ministry to my father and to my family. We had a very dear friend named Sandy Billy, who cleaned his apartment, she took him shopping regularly, and she cut his hair, and she was a dear friend. My dad loved Sandy like a daughter, and I know Sandy is here, and thank you, Sandy, for the ministry that you also showed to my father. As an only child, I was the only source of grandchildren for my parents. So I felt an acute responsibility to do as much as I could for them. I have a wonderful wife, a patient wife, and we have given my grandparents 8 wonderful grandkids. 2 of my grandkids have given their grandparents wonderful grandkid-in-laws. I have a wonderful daughter-in-law, Kelsey, and a wonderful son-in-law, Eric. All of whom are in town this weekend, by God's grace. God knew we were planning on everybody being here already, and so he brought us all together. And we didn't know that the reason was for this service, but I'm grateful to God. On behalf of my entire family, I want to thank all of you for the incredible outpouring of support and love that you've shown during these last several days. Katie, you've been an amazing daughter-in-law. My dad loved you like the daughter he never had. Thank you. My dad adored his grandkids. He would often put on this baseball cap that says, "Proud Grandpa." And he would frequently come over for birthday parties wearing this wonderful shirt that said, "My favorite people call me Grandpa." I'm grateful that Katie and I were able to give him these wonderful grandkids. They all miss him. But we have this incredible hope, and my kids know this, that we're going to see Grandpa and Grandma again in heaven. Tony, I want to extend a special thank you to you. Since we came to Hillside, originally First Baptist Church in 1973, there have been at least 6 pastors, not counting interim pastors, that have served at that church. And my parents loved all of them. You were very special to them. I had not been a part of Hillside for many years, but when you came to serve as pastor, my parents spoke glowingly of you and the ministry that you brought to this church. My most vivid personal memory of you was the day when you called me to tell me of my mother's death. When I got to the hospital, you were there with my dad, comforting him. Thank you. Often when I would pick up my dad after church, he would tell me about how much he enjoyed your sermons. I got the idea that he was trying to see if our sermon in our church was better than your sermon in your church. He would often ask me how many people were in our church that day and tell me how many people were in your church that day. And he would always tell me how many people were baptized and how many people had become members, and then ask me how many people had become members. It became quite a competition for my dad. I know my parents were very disappointed when we left Hillside, but God called us to a different ministry, and God knew what he was doing. Thank you to the many friends from Hillside who have loved my family throughout the years. My dad would have celebrated 42 years of membership at Hillside in August. He made a good choice in 1973, even if he didn't discuss it with my mom first. This is a day of sorrow, but it's also a day of celebration. In recent years, my dad has been dealing with increasing levels of pain. It had gotten difficult for him to walk for any length of time, and he had been having some stomach problems as well. 2 years ago, it was discovered that he had skin cancer, and although the surgery was successful in removing the tumor, and he was completely cancer-free. The additional doctor's appointments and follow-up tests added to the physical stress that he felt. It was hard to see him struggling with the pain. This past Sunday at my church, we sang a worship song, I Am Free. Tears poured down my cheeks as we sang the words, I'm free to run, I am free to dance, I am free to live for you. I am free. And I thought of my dad, who last week ran into the arms of Jesus. Free of pain, free of the limitations of this earth. I wish I could have seen him dance. That would have been very interesting. He's free of the sin that tries to bind us up in this world, and I'm so thankful that we have a Father in heaven who offers us unconditional love and salvation if we will just accept the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. My dad was not a wealthy man, but he was extremely generous and humble. He gave of his time as a volunteer throughout his entire life. At Hillside, he cataloged and systemized thousands of books to develop and organize the first church library. He served as the church librarian for many years. I remember spending many Sunday afternoons against my will recording book information on the 3x5 index cards as Dad built a card catalog from scratch. Many of you may not have known that my dad was a member of the Calumet Clown Club. He went by the name Pockets, and his clown costume had pockets everywhere. He and his clown friends would visit children in hospitals to bring them joy and happiness when they were struggling, and the kids could pick things out of his pocket. It was a great joy to him. But as most of you know, his largest volunteering commitment was at Every Child Ministries in Hebron, where he served for many years. He even earned the U.S. President's Award for Volunteer Service, an award that I was completely aware he had received until I found it in his personal papers just this weekend. He donated hundreds of hours for ECM. He was humble, but he didn't brag about it. Every year at ECM, hundreds of hours were spent serving children in Africa and serving his Father in heaven. His legacy of volunteerism can be best summed up in a statement that was on the online obituary record book this morning. A young woman named Holly wrote, I knew Gordon through his faithful volunteering at ECM. He made thousands of those beautiful verse plaques for the children in Africa who have so little, and he took great care with each one to make sure the picture was centered and appropriate for the verse. Behind Elaine and his family and friends will be a crowd of African children and parents waiting to thank him for the part he played in their eternity. He truly ran the good race to the final finish. You can be so proud of your dad and grandpa. We are proud, Holly. We're very proud. As a matter of fact, as I was going through some papers this weekend in his apartment, I found a bag of Christmas cards that he had been cutting up for ECM. He worked on them at home. He would go into the ECM offices twice a week to volunteer. I know many of his ECM colleagues are here. To John and Lorella Rouster, and all of the staff at ECM, I want to thank you for being a part of my dad's life these many years. It is my dad's love for ECM and its work in Africa that made it easy for us to request that donations be made to ECM in his honor. As I said, my father was not a wealthy man, yet even living on a fixed Social Security income, I was stunned to discover that he gave nearly 20% of his meager income to the church, ECM, and other charitable organizations. He never told me about it. He financially supported me and all of his grandchildren when we went on mission trips overseas. He gave monthly to David Jeremiah Ministries and to Our Daily Bread, and he supported Moody Bible Institute and Bethel College. He graduated from Bethel with a bachelor's degree, hoping one day to be a pastor, and although that dream never came true, I think most of his other dreams did. My father struggled to handle his money well in his early life, but by the time of his death, he had become a model of biblical stewardship. I wish I had recognized that while he was still alive. But it is an example that I admire and hope I can emulate going forward. As I bring my comments comments to a close, I want to ask a question and issue a challenge for everyone in this room on behalf of my father. As I said, he was a humble man, so he would never say this to anyone directly. But he modeled this throughout his life, and his actions speak louder than words. I think we can all agree. When I ask you this question, where are you serving? How do you give? Where are you volunteering your time? The Bible says that God loves a cheerful giver, and my father certainly modeled that. So I would issue you this challenge. Find a place to volunteer your time. Discover how God wired you uniquely with your spiritual giftedness, and serve in an area that matches those gifts. Is it a local food bank? A children's hospital? Maybe it's a nursing home or St. Jude House. Does your church need volunteers to serve within their ministries? Find a place. Find your place. And serve, give, and volunteer. And just in case you aren't sure where you can donate your time and talents to serve, there is a wonderful organization in Hebron, Indiana that just lost a dedicated volunteer. And they have work to do in Africa. And they need your help. I challenge you to step up and serve.